probably. Hello.
How's it going, guys? How's the event so far today?
Oh, we're excited. Well, I'm excited, at least.
Yeah, I haven't done too many of these online conferences. It started getting a little more common, I guess.
Yeah. What?
I think we are a little bit early. Hi, Brian. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Yeah. I am trying to maybe make a maybe short announcement after that you can take it over. But I think we're still 5 minutes away. I think most of the people gonna trickle in. We have about 120 sign up today, so you are actually quite popular, Brian. Yeah.
Well, I hope I give them a show, I guess.
All right. We're looking forward because I'm excited too. So All right. So I'm gonna jump on a little bit, and then we maybe wait for maybe a few more minutes. All right.
Okay. No worries.
Uh-huh.
He's got his music playing in the background.
Looks a bit sunny behind you. What time is it?
No, I'm actually it's a light on in my room, believe it or not. It's almost it's just about 11 p.m. here. I'm actually in London.
Oh, it's 1 a.m. actually. I'm in Jordan.
Oh, okay, there you go. So you've even got me beat today. So
Yeah.
I thought I was going to be the most tired person on the call, but you've got me down.
No, I'm a uni student, so it's fine. This is my wake up time.
That's awesome.
see here. Can everybody see me?
Yes, sir.
Alright, sounds good. Okay, so I think we have maybe almost 15-20 people here, so we can go ahead and get started. And I think most people are gonna trickle in, and I think we have total almost 100 signups today. So I think it's gonna the participants going to jump. It's gonna be quite a few people here. So so my name is Leo Chen, and I am the chapter chair of IxDA Houston. And welcome you guys for joining us today. And can I ask, where does everybody come from? I'm seeing an international crowd today, so I'm quite excited. We are doing this event today. So if you can, put in chat, so we will know where you're from. And another thing is that I would like to share a link with you guys. Maybe you guys can share your LinkedIn information, so we have a little bit of a networking going on besides just the Brian's talk today. So I'm gonna post a link in the chat, so you guys can go in the mirror board and maybe paste your LinkedIn information in there, and and then we can connect each other using today's opportunity, and all right, sounds good. And next month we have another event, and April 22nd, and I realized today it is Earth Day, so we will have Women in Design Leadership panel talk. So please join us if you guys can next month, and I'm sure it will be quite interesting talk and panel discussion as well. So please join us next month on April 22nd. It's Earth Day, and it should be fun, okay? And Brian, I'm gonna let you take it over, all right? And here we go.
Hey everybody, let's start this up. I think once I start presenting that I won't be able to see anyone. So if you have an immediate emergency or something, please holler, because I can hear you. I just can't see the chat. I can't see any faces. I can't see hands. So here we go. All right, can we see that?
Yeah, we can see it.
Awesome. All right. So the title of my talk today is "Keeping It Mostly Real," because that's actually why I like the XR space in general, because it's a lot about actually staying in reality. So that's today's talk. So my name is Brian. It's good to be with all you people. I was in the video game industry for a very, very long time. Shipped a few dozen things, mostly gameplay and AI, which I consider to just be very, very informed gameplay. Worked on a million different types of games, genres of games, everything from a location-based ride to an arcade game to an educational game to you name it. After I got out of the game industry, I worked at Magic Leap, where I actually founded and ran the R&D team called the Interaction Lab, where we were almost 30 people at one point, and we did first turn on for features. We did a lot of exploration around experience and tried to document a lot of the things that I'll be talking about today. So that's what I did at Magic Leap. And then when I left Magic Leap, I decided to go completely sort of sideways, and then I found a company that basically has been doing adding reusable, essentially, elements into the world for almost 80 years. They're like the world's first XR company, Lego. And I'm currently Interaction Design Director for a fairly large project inside of Lego. So I want to start out with just a couple of general gameplay and AI design principles that I firmly believe in, and then I kind of want to just on each one do a tiny bit of talking to how I think the XR space has got some hardships on these, or is just a little bit different because of it. So my first one is that I very, very firmly believe that you should not just understand the input and the outputs and how your system is going to be using those inputs, the space of the input, you should feel it. I think that for like the PC or a console, we've got very good ideas as to what these types of input systems feel like the space of them, the space of possibility. You rarely even have to teach it, even a 2-year-old, how to use a mouse. It's so beautifully mapped out in the human brain, and it's very, very beautifully mapped out in human-computer interaction techniques, right? And yet, when we go to the XR space, especially VR, where it takes away a lot of the world, the reason she looks like she's staring off into space is probably because the UI that she's being shown is probably a floating button of some form, or maybe a list or something. And meanwhile, what's humorous to me about this picture is that she's sitting at a desk just covered in super usable affordances and beautifully designed systems. And meanwhile, she looks like she's a zombie wearing this beautiful piece of technology. And so we really don't understand the space of the input, the possibility space of the inputs in XR very, very well. I think part of the reason is because it's so many new inputs, it's so much information, right? And people are like, well, I just have to dig in and do my research and figure out all this. The problem is that unlike the mouse or the game controller or the keyboard, those are heavily abstracted inputs, and so they are very clean. They are very textbook, if you will. Whereas once you have an XR device, it's usually worn on the person directly, and that means that you're getting human input as opposed to abstracted human input. And human input is in no way clean. It's in no way even formulaic, right? I would go so far as to say, if you even ask a person their experience of their own movements and body, whatever, you're going to get something more like this, right? And it's kind of a joke. It's like a kid's drawing, but in reality, that is kind of like what if you were to map out people's eye gaze, let's say, or their hand positions as they twirl around in a room, you might actually get something that looks a lot like that. And so the funny thing is that's actually what it feels like to be a human. That kind of input, noisy and chaotic and very, very personal. And so XR has a lot of learning to do because of the fact that in order to really do good gameplay, you need to have that deep feeling, deep understanding of like what the space of possibility is, so that you can map it into an output space, not just one manner and let people have somewhat humanistic control, but if you actually want to use that mapping to then tell a story, evoke an emotion, do all kinds of goodness, now you really need to understand that, so that you can map it in the way that we do on any given game that we make, right? And the next principle that I use is about player expectation, and it's an important one because I've always found, like most people do, is that given a particular set of expectations, you can only move people's expectations so much at a time. In business, I think they call this change management, and they have found that if you try to change somebody's behavior patterns more than about 10 to 15% at a time, people tend to either freeze up or they tend to resist, as opposed to going with it. And so a lot of games and the tutorial level of a game is about taking somebody's expectation, let's say, of a particular genre of game, and then using the few early levels of the game to sort of slowly extend that expectation into the way in which your game works, and giving them nice, slow set of feedbacks to come and give them that change management that they need. And the thing is that video games, player expectation is actually pretty high. Here's a photo I'm sure everybody has seen over the last 20 plus years. Tomb Raider has gotten 200 to 300 times the polygons, and that's just the visual sort of expectation of quality that users have. And when they have this kind of expectation of the visuals, I can tell you very, very effectively that they have that kind of expectation about other parts of the game as well, right? And so we have a pretty hardcore audience that expects a ton of perfection out of their game. And the funny thing is that you can make a beautiful world in a video game, right? And you can have a beautiful simulation, and you can show that to the players right now. But the thing is that there's this interesting window in between them and the world, right? That the screen is effectively just as much a window as it is, a separation from the content. And there's a huge difference between looking outside a window at a beautiful scene and being jammed in the middle of that exact scene, right? Like there's a very different experiential thing there. And the same person who sits in front of that window and feels okay and knows exactly what to do is going to have a very different feeling when they're out in space. The next principle that I do is I tell people, they always say know your audience, but I personally like to think about all of the things, right? You need to not only know your audience, but you need to think about player expectation, like I just said, and that kind of comes in the form of the genre and the competition. You also need to know about the people that you're going to be building this game with, and the company's expectations of you, right? Like know your audience. Well, guess what? Your boss is probably one of your audience members as well. And you need to know all of these things. And lastly, you need to know about yourself and all of the traps and the foibles of all of these things. You have to know these things in order to really make good gameplay systems, because if you don't manage expectation, if you don't keep scope in mind, if you don't look at the restrictions on your platform, all of these things can be a problem. Now, the interesting thing is that in the XR space, we don't really have a huge understanding of who the audience is right now. We don't have a lot of very specific XR game genres. There's not a ton of competing products out there. Most teams don't have a ton of experience. And the same with companies. They might be startups at this point that are doing a lot of heavy XR game work, right? And so a lot of these things are question marks, and that's a huge sort of problem when you talk about my methodology, right? And so I had to devise a lot of things in the midst of just tons of unknowns while I was working in this space, because most of the ground under your feet is no longer solid. And then my last gameplay principle that I always use is to sort of start out with a safe space, right? Give people. I like to do what I call the LucasArts method. When you're learning the game, when you're exploring the early parts, it should be a safe space. I should be able to just about do anything I want, and I'm not going to die. I'm not going to be punished for trying. And the beautiful thing is that I can spend as much time as I want in that safe space, and then when I decide to go out into the real world, I can now have a nice open sandbox that lets me take the skills that I've learned inside of your room and express myself into the rest of the story and feel powerful as I get more and more mastery, right? But the interesting thing is that when you're in a more immersive game, going from safe space to open sandbox is a much bigger sort of step off the pier, if you will, than a regular game, right? Well, if you're in a regular game, you just go to a slightly harder level, but again, you still have that nice window separation between you and the content, where if you're in a more immersive game, suddenly people are going to start invading your personal space bubble real hard. And so there's a very interesting notion when you suddenly want to go from safe space to regular in an immersive game, because suddenly you've got additional things to contend with that you maybe don't have to on a screen-based title. So I don't want to doom and gloom you. I'm saying the XR space is an amazing place, right? It's awesome in that we can basically disrespect a lot of things. We can mess with time and space and scale, and very, very real people can be in very unreal places, and very unreal places can be wrapped around very unreal characters. It's a beautiful thing that we can make a mockery of our typical game levels and our very typical living rooms. And so I got to tell you, I'm super excited when I make games in the XR space, because there's so much more room for fun and exploration because of the affordances that the medium gives you. So I have 5 very general principles when I'm building XR systems. When I'm trying to do gameplay and design fun experiences in XR. Now, all of these are probably going to change over time. In fact, they've changed many times in the several years that I've been in the space. But the most foundational one, the one that I believe in the most, is respect reality. I'm going to go over these in a little bit more detail in a sec, so I'm going to just sort of wang through them right now. I very much so believe in using the medium strengths. A lot of people, when they go to make their first XR title, they may be a very powerful game developer on a more traditional medium, and they'll just start using everything that they know right off the bat, and I have to remind people over and over again, hey, this isn't just a different platform, this isn't just a different type of display, this is a very, very different medium, and you have to use the right tool for the job, right? You can't just port your game over to VR or AR and have it be great. You have to use the medium strengths. I always say to use just enough digital stuff, right? I'll talk more about that. Engage as many of the senses as you can on the system. And sharing is caring. Multiplayer is a super key ingredient in immersive technology. I'll talk to it more. So, respect reality. Why do I say this? The reason that I say this is because you're going to be, especially in AR and mixed reality, you're going to be mixing the real world with digital stuff. But even in a VR title, you're immersing a person so much that if you can give them any indication as to what type of world they're in very quickly, you can lower some of their expectations, some of their questions around what they should be expecting, right? And so if your game uses real physics, that's one of the most strong and globally understood reality cues, right? If somebody throws a ball at you and it comes at you in roughly a parabolic shape, you'll recognize that, okay, I'm probably in a world where gravity is somewhat recognizable, and not only that, your hand will probably be wherever it needs to be to catch the ball, right? You don't have to teach that. It's actually very, very ingrained in everybody that's been born on the planet Earth, for the most part. Secondly, direct physical interactions feel great. And this goes back to what I said about respecting reality. If I'm pushing a button that's a ghost in front of me, that doesn't feel very real, especially because I can't even touch it for most cases. Now, if I take that same button and I hover it a couple of inches on top of a physical surface, so that when the person pushes the button, his finger or her finger pushes through the ghost-like button and touches the table underneath, now suddenly I get a physical interaction for that button, and it makes my brain think that it's really there just a little bit. It gives me a reality cue that makes it think that it's really there. But it goes further than this, right? It goes back to kind of what we were saying about having the space mapped out. Another reason why people people like mice so much is because you don't have to, you don't have to be taught it. But part of the reason you don't have to be taught it is that it's a one-to-one correspondence between your hand and the mouse cursor. Nobody, I've been a touch typist for decades, and I still look down at the keys quite frequently to type things out or whatever. I don't know that I've looked at my mouse for years. I reach over towards where I know it is with my hand, and then I immediately look at the cursor because my hand is not necessary. I don't need to look at the mouse. The only time I might look at the mouse is if I accidentally run my mouse into a sticky patch of something on my desk because I spilled something. But for the most part, it's a one-to-one correspondence, and it's such a tight feedback loop that our brain picks up on it instantly. And so if you have direct interactions, it becomes very, very good to the human brain because it's so easy to predict what's going to happen when I grabbed onto something that cold if that direct physical interaction is modeled in roughly the way that you would expect it to in real life. And finally, another form of reality that helps with immersive experiences is social roles, right? Like, you may have heard me talk about this in another talk, but like, if I go to a movie theater, I'm in the movie world, right? I have to follow the rules of the movie. I have to sit in a dark room and be quiet and not use my phone. But I do that that's the cost of me entering the world. But and then in payment, what they do is they blast me with this beautiful IMAX movie theater, sound and light, and crazy goodness, and I get to be immersed in their world. I'm in the movie world. But if I'm in my living room and some content is walking around in the room with me, that content is now in my world. The content is a house guest, right? The content is over at my house, and just like any house guest, if I have somebody over and they're telling me a story and the phone rings and I say, hold on, I got to pick this up, and that person keeps talking, gets in front of me, and doesn't let me answer the phone, that's not a very good house guest, right? And so if I have an experience running in somebody's house and it's a more casual kind of experience, suddenly I have to follow some social rules. I have to follow a little bit of this is your domain style rules. Otherwise, I'm not being a very good house guest, and I'm not doing a good job of making a good chunk of content. Obviously I'm not saying don't break the rules. I'm saying only break the rules if that's the goal of the particular experience. The more rules you can follow, the more it'll ground the experience in reality, and therefore the magic of it will come across much higher because there'll be so many cues that what they're seeing is mostly reality that suddenly the magical stuff comes across that much better. Use the strengths of the medium. Suddenly, human interfaces can be more human. The reason that interfaces are largely abstract is because we just have a mouse, we just have a keyboard, we just have a few buttons and some joysticks. And so therefore you have to take all of human richness and boil it down to those things. And yes, those are a little bit more basic and straightforward, but now we have the human richness, we have all of this inputs coming in from the human itself, and so you can start to use more quote-unquote naturalistic inputs. Now, this does come at a cost, because while everybody potentially has hands, almost nobody potentially uses their hands in the same way. And so there's definitely a cost to using natural inputs, and that the complexity is a lot higher. But the interfaces don't need to be as abstract, and so therefore they don't need to be as there's a lot of in HCI there's a lot of detail about don't make options hidden and don't do these things because discoverability is difficult. Whereas if the interface is a lot more natural, now suddenly you can hide things a little bit because the method of input is so much more natural to people that they can deal with a little bit of let's put it this way. When I go into my kitchen, all of my pots and pans are not completely on display and ready to go in a grid pattern on the wall. I I guess maybe some cooks do that, but like the vast majority of people don't. They can organize things in a little bit more natural, human way. It's still spatialized, but it's been handled with some drawers and some cupboards, right? And so you can start to make interfaces that are a bit more sort of human task-centric instead. And speaks to this a little bit as well. Screen real estate isn't a premium resource. Now I think the premium resource is probably human attention, right? Which is another problem altogether. But you can start to play with showing more options, showing multiple copies of the options. You can have different layouts here and there in the other place. And you can make gameplay systems that aren't reliant on HUD elements because you got to have it on the screen all the time. You can know where people are looking. You can put the information there. You can do things that don't follow the old rules of I don't have room to show that. I don't do this. I don't want to occlude the user's view with something in a quote-unquote heads-up display sort of manner. And finally, one of the other strengths of the medium is obviously that all the sensing that you're doing gives you much richer context of the world and the user. And you really need to lean in on this because, again, it comes back to the more reality cues you can put into it, the more connected to the world they'll be, right? Use just enough digital. I always say that each pixel should have a purpose, and the reason I say this is because, again, if you're trying to keep the experience grounded in reality, if everything's painted, it's sort of like that line from the Incredibles where the bad guy says, once everybody is super, then nobody is. It sort of loses its power to kind of overwhelm the user with sort of a magic notion if everything is that way, right? And so only use as many pixels as you really need to. Each individual pixel will be that much more magical in the end. A lot of people haven't really done much experimentation with XR yet. I mean, consumers. And so, they jump in. Maybe one of their friends has a set, or maybe they're seeing it for the first time at an event somewhere. And people only have so much space in their brain at one time to learn new things. And literally just the act of putting on the device and starting it up, and maybe they have controllers in their hands, or maybe they're being asked to do some other sort of input. Suddenly they're overloaded. They don't even know what to do, right? And you get to that point where the experience needs to be very, very simple for newish users because they barely have anything left bandwidth-wise in order to really get going. Finally, make the world have a primary role. I've always found this makes a better gameplay experience, just over and over again, because again, you can just harvest the ability to kind of essentially borrow user expectations of the real world, and you don't have to teach any of that. That's not stuff that you need to put into your tutorial. If I want to use real surfaces, I know what they sound like when something hits it, so I can replicate that noise, and now it makes it even more real. All kinds of goodness. And finally, multi-user. If I see something, if I see a 2-foot-tall Tyrannosaurus Rex run across the floor, the very first thing I'm going to do is turn to the person next to me and say, "Hey, did you see that, or am I crazy?" Human beings look to each other for validation, so that they don't, maybe they ate something bad for lunch, and they need to validate and make sure they're not crazy, or they're not drunk or something. So they ask each other, and having a multi-user environment where somebody else can go, "Oh my gosh, that was amazing." Now suddenly it really feels real, because now, I'm not crazy. The guy next to me saw it too, and it makes it that much more real as a human experience. We did tons of experiments with actual shared interfaces interfaces, like task-based interfaces, or larger game-style interfaces where the interface was like party-based, if you will, and everybody had a role. And those interfaces are super amazing because they're novel, which is it's always fun to have something new, but they end up being like the interface itself ends up helping build a structure for social play and for cooperative play, and so you get this wonderful sense of like building the barn together, kind of where whole groups of people can get together and kind of like it's almost like a 3D real-time feedback board game where everybody's working on the same thing at the same time, and those sort of interfaces always felt really, really good when we prototyped them. And finally, a lot of people talk about co-presence, but there's a lot more to be gained when you're not just present with each other, but you're actually doing things together, and you've got shared goals and shared aligned kind of like sort of like outcomes at the same time. It's not just co-presence, it's sort of like co-presence of mind, and that's what I'm calling entrainment. And that actually builds trust in people. That's one of the reasons why humans like to do large social things together, and because it builds trust, it bonds people. You feel like you're part of something bigger, and it's a beautiful thing. And finally, you're not just talking about using visuals, about using the ability to put pixels on the couch next to you and that kind of thing. There's also lighting things. You can highlight things and make a flashlight or shadows. Play with shadows. Play with colors. You can do crazy things with occlusion. And cover over small items in the world if you have the right kind of immersive technology, like a pass-through VR set or something. And sound. Spatial audio is actually a pretty amazing new output of wearable tech. You can not only do some pretty crazy effects that you've really not been able to do unless you're like a Dolby 7.1 engineer, or again, you work for IMAX movie theaters, but suddenly we can put sounds right in the right place, and they can float around in the right way, and like they can go through a window and get muffled, all kinds of goodness. Spatial audio is going to be the thing that probably amazes you most when you really dive into the EXR immersive world for the first time. The other thing that's interesting is that when you throw a ball into a room, if it sounds right, you'll know instantly, and if it sounds like it's being procedurally generated by a system that's not using a lot of information, you'll also know it right away. That'll become the uncanny valley part of the experience. And so, contact with the world ends up being just as much an audio thing as it is a visual thing. And finally, touch. One of the big things in immersive technology is this lack of touch, but that doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of people working on it. We're doing everything we can actually to get hand tracking to be good on direct interactions with surfaces, because that's where we really want to be. We did a lot of experiments with drawing or writing or typing and that kind of thing, and what we found over and over again is that if you could put your hands fairly close to an actual surface that exists, you not only get a little bit of the haptic feel of like touching, to let your body know that you've done the tap motion with your hand, but we also found that like we use the surface for other reasons, right? We use the surface to constrain our 26 degree of freedom hand to be a 2D thing, so it's easier to write your name when you're writing it on an actual whiteboard instead of in space. We also lean on the wall so that we get a little bit of rest while we lean on the wall, right? There's so many reasons why we use surfaces with our hands, and we don't just walk around punching things in the air all the time, right? Haptics and direct surface interaction are some of the reasons why once those things are solved, we're going to have a much more full and rich experience in XR. And finally, there's a billion other things you can do with IoT integration, because if you've got a computer that's Wi-Fi or Bluetooth enabled, you can kind of aggregate up other distributed sensors and those sorts of things in your house or in an escape room or whatever it is that you're working on. So I have a few, I challenge yous for people that are out there currently building XR games or experiences. I think these are some things that have gotten a little bit overused by the early community, and I think that they're starting to make people feel that this is all XR has to offer. So I want to throw down the gauntlet a little bit and challenge people to try and put them aside for a little while. First is laser pointers. I think laser pointers kind of make people stand in a corner and kind of move everything with this long finger, if you will. And to a certain extent, the laser pointer is basically just the mouse that's been ported to XR or VR. And I think that a lot of people think that they're actually a great way of doing things, and I really challenge that at a lot of levels. I think that it actually undercuts a lot of the goodness of the medium pretty heavily. And I think it's mostly because, like I said, people are used to a particular way of doing things with a screen, and this is the closest thing to continuing that paradigm. Don't give me any jump scare games anymore. I think we've had enough. I think we've had years of them, and I think part of the reason that they're so popular in immersive worlds is because fear is probably the easiest emotion to evoke, especially in an immersive title where you have control of the lighting and cinematic audio, sort of soundtracks teasing at people's heartstrings, and then you can jump out of them with horrifying creatures, right? And so I think it's just easy, right? It's sort of like the gimme of it's the laugh track of emotional XR content. I don't want any more, sort of stationary, kind of stand there and have the very tiniest bit of 3D kind of experience, except for the fact that I'm not even room scale. I'm just sort of standing scale, right? I'm just sort of standing there, and things are flying at me. I think that we're ready to move past that, and I would love to see a rhythm fitness game that had real room scale to it, or even multi-room scale, or all kinds of things. But moving around in the world is not a thing to fear. And I think we need to start getting past the point of people just standing in one spot. And finally, we have to start thinking of the human as more than just the person holding the camera in XR. It is a person, and so it's not just the camera position. It's a proxy for an entire human being. And so I challenge you to start thinking of head pose even as more than just the camera position. I challenge you to do some analysis on it, find out what you can from it. I gave a talk a number of years ago of 100 things you can do with head pose, and it's amazing input. And I tell you, the more you dig at it, the more you're going to find, and the more cool things you're going to do with it. But what else is there? Is there any way that we can escape our current sort of scenario? Is there anything left, or are we doomed to just continue to repeat the same stuff over and over again? And I have to tell you that no. We've barely scratched the surface of this giant new space. I'm gonna just flash a bunch of things here, but for the most part, I'm just gonna sort of mention these because the vast majority of what I'm about to put on the screen is probably a talk unto itself, right? Like there's so much stuff in the XR world, so many new gameplay experiences, so many new ways to like use these vastly awesome humanistic inputs. And so, real world integration is just at its infancy. Things like sound fields are just mind-blowingly nascent. We've got light fields. We barely started sound fields. I would say sound technology is approximately at Atari 800 levels right now. Whereas, like I said, Tomb Raider has 300 times the polygons that it did 20 years ago. Lighting and shadows are just starting to get really, really good in that you can barely tell if something is lit in the right way, fake or real, right? Deconstructed reality, I mentioned something about this where you can take and paint over the top of something. So I could take a Starbucks cup and I could turn it into a cup for Pete's coffee, just sort of like get rid of all the Starbucks cups and see it that way. And physical interactions past collisions, like I said, I hinted at one with audio earlier, but there's a heck of a lot more physical interactions that you can model. Like, how about not just collision, but what if I'm dragging something across a surface? Like the audio of that interaction is actually pretty darn complex and pretty difficult, and will give you an enormous amount of cues that things in the real world, if it sounds like it would when it dragged across the floor. User understanding, I've talked about this a number of times, even today. We've got a lot more to go. When I have as much input from a human being as a wearable computer gives you, I can fully tell your intentions and where you're putting your attention pretty well. There's a number of different reference frames and how you translate between them. Full-fledged interaction pose of your hand, so that not only do I know where your hand is tracking, but the interaction point that you're using when you're doing a particular task or using some form of tool. There's a ton of very contextual, very rich goodness in that direction that we barely started to even look at. And finally, a lot of the environmental stuff. This is where you can talk a little bit about computer vision, but there's other things, right? There's sort of situational awareness or even long-term temporal stuff. And so suddenly you could make a game where, because the last 7 times that I sat in a particular chair, now the game knows that that's my favorite chair, or maybe that's the one I use the most, and it might actually change the game because of that. Or it might say, you know what, after 15 minutes, usually the player has gotten tired after about 15 minutes. And so even though they're doing well, they might slightly change up the experience just simply because they know the pattern is coming. And again, situational awareness, things like, if we're in the living room and in the next room the baby starts crying, maybe it automatically, pauses for you, so that people that are playing don't even have to ask; they can just go and take care of what they need to take care of. And obviously that's an external situational awareness, but there's just as many things going on internal, like nonverbal communication and other crazy things like that. So, anyways, like I said, this is a tiny list of a huge external space, and there's so many things to do and so many places to go. Feel free down the road to sort of reach out, and if you have additional questions right now, then we can talk. But otherwise, feel free to reach out. We can talk later.
All right. Thank you, Brian, for an interesting talk, I guess. So I guess we can open up for Q&A. If anybody have any questions, please put them in chat. And I think maybe I have a couple questions to start off with you, Brian. So how far do you think maybe we are going to like the space of AR and VR or XR? How far do you think we are like maybe going to a scenario like maybe Blade Runner or or Ghost in the Shell where
I mean, I think we're a ways off from sort of like total ubiquitous usage of AR. I don't think we're as far off as people think. Like the one thing I will say is that I don't think that there's like a winner per se. I think that like VR is a beautiful escape methodology and like it lets you journey to a completely new place very, very easily. And like I said, that's kind of the equivalent of an IMAX theater, right? And so I don't think that's going to go anywhere. But like the interesting thing is that in exactly the way that not a lot of people go to IMAX theaters, they have big TVs at home and they go to regular movie theaters. There's a lot more sort of opportunity for AR and MR, if you will, because we spend so much more time out here in the real world, and so having, I've jokingly said that I already have a wearable computer. It's just that it's got a really crappy field of view, and I have to hold it in my hand. You know what I mean? And I think that this is a bad wearable computer. It's a really good mobile computer, but it's a bad wearable. And human beings are going to get to the point where they want both of their hands free. and if I can just put on a pair of glasses and go from there, that is a better wearable computer. And so I don't think we're super close to Blade Runner, but I don't think we're going to have to wait even 10 years before we actually have a pretty nice set of glasses that like, I'm just walking around and I'm doing my compute tasks and I've got my glasses on, and that's where I am.
Yeah, I think thank you to Magic Leap. They are working on it, and I think maybe Apple is doing something as well. So hopefully we can see it in a few years, adoption of those technology. So I think Rachel Faulkner has some question regarding Rachel. Would you like to come on and talk about your questions?
Yeah, I'll just be really quick here, but I was curious, when you are developing as well as kind of testing out these experiences, knowing that, it's potentially for LEGO, what are some limitations in terms of cognitive or like human factors, meaning like macro and micro motor skills, for example, with like younger kids? Are there any kind of considerations that you put to mind as you're putting those things together?
No, I mean, for sure. I mean, at Magic Leap, we had an entire, like, we called it the quantified experience, the QX folks, that we were working very closely with them to do a ton of sort of like user research into how humans perceive light fields and how to do safe technology with those groups. As it was, because of some of the experiences that we made and experiments that we made, the original Magic Leap wasn't actually even recommended for kids under 14, partially because of IPD constraints, but mostly because we didn't want kids, full-blown going into stuff that we didn't have all of the science buttoned down as to like what maybe the longer-term effects were. And so we were being very, very cautious with that kind of stuff. And I will say that LEGO is even more cautious than almost any company on the planet when it comes to any sort of safety issues like that. So yes, for sure, that we're always thinking about those sorts of things.
Do you guys see yourself, building out educational platforms in the future? And one thought that comes to mind recently is doing some research with how to communicate in Hong Kong, right? During this time, right, that like Hong Kong is going through. And I had friends tell me that their kids and parents were sending messages through like Minecraft, like burying messages way deep down inside this game. And I was just curious, like, do you guys see, with that trust component, how do you see like this mutual place of trust in the digital world for even younger generations that have like challenges ahead?
Yeah, it's actually funny. So I wanna say two things to that. The first one is that actually education is a monstrous area for mixed reality, for spatial computing, because it allows personalized sort of like digital information to be given on a per student basis. And so like I can be in front of a very large class, we can have a shared digital experience, but if you request additional information, you can be given that information without actually interrupting anybody else's stuff. We can have multiple people interacting with the primary content at the same time, and it's a much better learning environment. And almost every experiment that we did on that has actually proved that out over and over again. It's a much better learning environment than Blackboard, or having 100 people all on their own laptops, of which I have no control over what they're actually doing on those laptops, or sort of ability to kind of like rein in sort of like large groups of kids on trying to focus their attention on certain things. The other thing that I will say about I think you were hinting just the tiniest bit, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, at sort of like data security and trust is I've actually heard quite frequently this whole like, well, some companies are heading towards like a cloud-based compute model to make the glasses smaller, and I have to say, like, until I really see that like the data security is a heck of a lot better than like I've seen offered from a lot, I think that the actual tethered sort of like local computer that's handling that data, or even like I've got my cell phone and it's maybe wireless, but it's my cell phone, and so like for all intents and purposes, it's sort of like my data is only going locally and I'm doing all my own compute right there. I think that's still going to be important for a while until there is that security, because these devices are suddenly capable of capturing much more intimate data than our laptops are, and even to a certain extent than our cell phones are right now. Our cell phones have a ton of information on us, but they certainly don't have like where my eyes are looking at all times or something like that. And so this is a pretty big chunk of additional intimate data that like we wouldn't really want getting into the wrong hands, if you will. So those sorts of issues are. We spent so much time magically thinking about that kind of thing, and like it's not a completely solved problem. It's like it's not even a solved problem on the internet in general, much less with a much more intimate data structure that we have going on now.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's so much faster when it's kept local. I appreciate it, Brian.
Yeah.
And next up we have Mark. Would you like to come on and talk about your questions?
Sure. My question was mostly about, like, I don't know how familiar you are with non-Euclidean geometry. I just kind of want to get your thoughts on just using that in XR games, trying to cheat the limited amount of space a lot of people have to open up larger spaces for them. See what you thought about it.
Yeah, I've seen some cool examples of that. I mean, to be honest, I actually like the ones where you use sort of like other types of cheats, like maybe there's a chair or something, or some sort of artificial doorway that like is in the middle of the space, so that I can like open up the door and I go into there, and I turn around and I open up the door again and I go into another. Like I'm a little bit the non-Euclidean stuff, like it can take, if it's not done really well, it can lead to a source of uncomfortableness in some cases, and I think it also kind of like is more of a VR sort of thing, right? Like I think you can trick just a slightly, it looks like a straight line in VR space, but it's actually slightly curved, so that like you can get people to kind of like steer in the void or something like large VR open space. I haven't seen a lot of really good examples of those used in sort of very small things, because the level of tweak you'd have to do in a non-Euclidean space, and like let's say the room I'm in right now, it would be pretty jarring to try and like get somebody to think that they were walking in a straight line or something. And so I actually like using a physical thing as a prop or something to make it feel like, oh, if I sit down in this chair, I'm transported somewhere, and now I have more space. And I get back in the chair, and it's sort of like it's like an interesting way of switching between walking around in a small area and quote unquote teleporting without having to use a teleport mechanic. So I think there's ways of getting around it that's still kind of like more like in world, in experience. Because, like I said, I haven't seen a ton of good examples of it.
Gotcha. Cool. Thanks.
All right, I think we're gonna do one last question. Anybody want to jump in? And this is your chance. One last question.
I'll jump in. If I'm coming through already. I don't know if I am or not.
Yeah.
All right. So, like Cornelius noted in the chat, because I'm in the same boat as he is, the whole idea of XR is very, very new to me. I'm mostly just solely familiar with VR and VR headsets. So AR is completely a different arena to me. So I'm just kind of interested in your take on a very base level of where you think the advantages of AR shine in comparison to something like VR that's very much like you have an established room space where you have your headset, you have your sensors around you.
Yeah, so in more XR space, and more where you're still in actual reality, you can, like, I could be sitting at my actual laptop right here, and meanwhile, like I've got additional information off the side, and I've got, because I'm wearing another computer, I can incorporate the stuff that I have into my room right now, but I can also have other things going on. I can get up and walk into the next room, and meanwhile, I still have a computer that's potentially augmenting the space that I'm walking in that direction over there. I can have characters in other rooms, and they can call to me. Like I said, I've got spatialized audio, so I can, hey Brian, can you come into the next room? And I go into the next room, and there's Roger Rabbit standing in the next room, right? And so the reason that I'm saying that there's more space for opportunity is that they don't require that space. They don't require effectively a movie theater. They will work in this room. They'll work in the next room. I can go to work. I can go on the bus. I can do. It's like eventually, what we're talking about is exactly like the smartphone. It's a computer that I carry around with me, and I take it wherever I am in my world, because I have compute tasks that I need to do, or entertainment needs that I have while I'm out in the world. And so likewise, AR and XR are specifically around taking them out into the world, taking them with me, and as opposed to sort of escaping into that VR space, right? So that's the reason why it's not so much that it's better, it's that it's different, and that there's a lot more opportunities for that, just simply because there's a lot more opportunities for various use cases just out in the world. Like I said, education, work, all kinds of crazy good stuff.
Awesome, thank you. That really put a lot of the other stuff in this talk into greater context for me.
All right, that wraps up today, and for a whole week of South by Southwest special event. And thank you, Brian, for participating and joining us be a speaker today. And well, IxDA Houston will thank you forever, and hopefully, in the near future, we can have you come on again, and hopefully, So don't forget, if you are interested in our topic for next month, the leadership in woman in UX leadership panel. Please join us on Thursday, April 22nd, and we'll see you next month. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. All right, bye.